Okay, so I'm Zack.
And I'm Kat.
And we are from the Center for Genomic Gastronomy. We realized as we were putting this together that it wasn't our intention that all of the research is eating strange and dangerous things. It's not usually what we do, but tonight that's what it is. So the name is Curious Cookery, Impossible Ingredients, and Dangerous Diets.
The Center for Genomic Gastronomy kind of stemmed from an interest in food, but seeing what are the alternatives to molecular gastronomy. So basically, it is not molecular gastronomy, and instead it aims to take a systems approach to food by exploring political, cultural, and technological contexts of what we consume.
So this is just a selection of some of the things we've been up to for the last 2 years. And so we do want to study the genomes and biotechnologies that make up the human food systems on planet Earth, and we use those words very broadly. Tonight we're going to focus on 5 ingredients from our recent research. So I'm originally from the US, and there we called aubergine eggplant, but I'll be talking about India, where they call aubergine brinjal. So the Center for Genomic Gastronomy actually started off in early 2010 when the debate over genetically modified aubergine, called BT brinjal, was at its peak. And so aubergine is a staple in the subcontinent. And here you can see the average regional eggplant or aubergine production. And so you can see by this map why multinational corporations like Monsanto would be keen on selling their genetically engineered seeds, particularly in India. China has a lot of aubergine production, but they have their own state-run transgenic programs. Aubergine is the only nightshade that's indigenous to the Old World, that didn't come from the New World. It's been cultivated there for a very long time, so there's a particularly strong cookery culture around it. And when Monsanto's product was being trying to be brought into the country, there was a huge unified resistance against it from many regions in the country. And there's many reasons why Indian citizens were concerned about BT brinjal, including human and ecosystem health, intellectual property regimes, agricultural biodiversities, and others. However, many Indian scientists that I spoke to or talked to in public spaces or read were in favor of BT brinjal seeds being sold, saying that the seeds would be good for productivity, help food security, possibly help business, and that fears around them were overblown. So these are 8 of the brinjal varietals found commonly in the Bangalore markets. Each different varietal has a flavor, a texture, and a collection of recipes that's a bit different. And we're starting to think of recipes as a technological ecosystem where certain ingredients, methods of preparation, flavors, and varieties are all connected and co-evolving with each other. So I may have missed something because I only had access to the English language press, not Hindi or Kannada, but there was rarely the voices of cooks or eaters in this debate. So strange as it seems, it actually never came up in the debate which varietal of aubergine was going to be sold by Monsanto. So if someone had simply asked, what will genetically engineered aubergines taste like? We would know more about the plans and what varietals were there. So we're starting to call this connection between ecology, agriculture, and cuisine the biodiversity of the kitchen. There's over 200 landraces, cultivars, and hybrid varietals of aubergine in India that all form as inputs for the kitchen. And so each becomes associated with a network of recipes, flavors, traditions, ways of cooking in this sort of coevolution. So the last thing I want to say about these brinjals is that they may be a really great example of how food systems learn. And I'm reminded of Stuart Brand's classic book, How Buildings Learn, in which he argues against the top-down utopian quests of modernist architecture and favors a bottom-up, iterative, situational tinkering by people who have smaller parcels. So not considering taste, preferences, cuisine, and culture in discussions about agriculture and biotechnology seems extremely arrogant and also traps us in a sort of fairly reductive view of food, focusing on the industrial ideals of efficiency, fungibility, and nutritionalism. So for food systems to actually learn, we probably need to take into consideration taste, cuisine, and people's preferences. And the debate over BT brinjal in India, still ongoing, is much richer when we take into account flavor, cuisine, and other nuanced ways of knowing these genomes.
So the second ingredient for today is grapefruit, and it starts with a question. So what is innovation, and is all innovation good? To date, the atomic bomb has only been deployed twice in warfare. August in 1945, 2 nuclear weapons were detonated in Japan. Over 50 years since this tragedy, this technology is labeled a weapon of mass destruction and is still a catalyst in ongoing war and conflict. Post-World War II, nation-states with atomic programs started to search for peaceful applications for this technology and explore potential uses for it within agriculture, medicine, and industry. So the US launched an Atoms for Peace program in 1953. And Paige Johnson has researched and written extensively about gamma gardens that started emerging at this time. So plants are grown and then exposed to radiation. Plants that manage to survive and display qualities that are preferable were then chosen and tested further. And so this is a form of selective breeding based on phenotype rather than genotype. So how it looks rather than how the makeup. Yesterday, I held in my hands the most sensational plant in Britain. It is the only one of its kind. Nothing of its sort has ever been seen in the country before. To me, it held all the romance of something from outer space. It is the first atomic peanut. It is a lush green plant and gives you a strange, almost alarming sense of thrusting power and lusty health. It holds a glittering promise in its green leaves, the promise of victory over famine. So this quote from 1959 emphasizes the enthusiasm that some people had for this new application of atomic energy. And whenever a new technology is introduced, the debates tend to be polarized. So at the time, its supporters were claiming that atomic agriculture will save us from famine, but on the other hand, its critics were horrified that we could continue to propagate such a destructive technology. However, today, these debates are all but forgotten, and some countries quietly continue to experiment with radiation breeding and releasing new plants. So here's a percentage of mutagenic varietals released per country. So most recently, the plant biology department at the University of California at Riverside announced the successful creation of Kino-LS. This sweet seedless fruit was approved in California and available to licensed nurseries since June 2011. And here you see the old version with lots of seeds, and post-radiation seedless varietal is born. Despite wide acceptance of working with nuclear materials for agriculture, it still requires some paperwork. And if you're curious about what mutagenic foods might exist in your neighborhood, you can take a look at the IAEA's META database. META stands for Mutation Enhanced Technologies for Agriculture. On May 18th, 2011, we were in Portland, Oregon, and found that there are a lot of mutagenic grapefruits available in the US. So we decided to see what we could find at our closest supermarket. And these three were the three available there. The first was a star ruby, which, when plugged into the database, turns out that it was approved in 1970. And the second was labeled Rio Red. This too is on the database, preferred for its deep red color. And the third was labeled Star Grapefruit, which didn't show up on the database, and we're not quite sure where that came from yet, but it's not really a respectable sample size. But as a very small local experiment, the results were actually quite surprising to us. It seems that when the hopes and dreams and fears and nightmares of an emerging technology subside, one is left with some seedless oranges. And mutagenic breeding did not end starvation, and many eaters are eating foods that arose from mutagenic breeding without even being aware of it. The relevance of this history to the debate about GMOs is quite striking, and it's time to be honest about what technology can change and what it can't change. So I don't think technology will ever single-handedly end world hunger, but it's embedded in a messy tangle of politics and economics, and it's sort of time to take that into account during debates about emerging technologies.
Okay, so next up we have a somewhat strange tomato. So this is the fish tomato, and it's one of the most elusive genomes in the history of biotechnology. And it's such an important story because a lot of people have a very visceral reaction to fish genes being inserted into a fruit or vegetable. It resonates strongly with something with them. And many histories of biotechnology don't include the fish tomato, and some even claim that the fish tomato was a figment of activists' imagination. Now, I remember posters containing the fish tomato going to punk rock concerts when I was a kid, so I was really curious about this and had to find out what the story with this particular tomato was. So the fish tomato is a tomato with an antifreeze gene inserted that was isolated from winter flounder, and the goal was to create a frost-tolerant varietal of tomato. So you would grow the tomato, if a light frost came, it would survive. So did the fish tomato ever exist? It was amazing when I looked at the literature, and there just did not seem very much information about it. So a funny thing happened. The internet's a pretty amazing thing. I was teaching a color theory class to freshman art students in Bangalore. It's a very progressive school, and I said we're going to study the colors of fruits and vegetables for our color theory class. I asked the students if they could find anything about fish tomatoes. Within 5 minutes, a student came up to me with a printout and said, "Is this helpful?" It was this document. So it was a recently digitized document from the USDA, and it was an application to the USDA by a company called DNA Plant Technology. And you can see the number and tomato antifreeze gene. So I was ecstatic, and I got to write one of the most wonderfully snarky emails of my life. I'm an art professor in India teaching color theory. You should fix your book. Here's the primary source document. Felt pretty good. So was the fish tomato ever tested outside the lab? According to the USDA documents, the company DNA Plant Technology did grow the tomatoes in lab greenhouses, and they received approval to release them into the environment in this county in California. Now, the USDA doesn't require companies to report back after they receive approval for field tests. So we don't know if the company actually grew the plant in the county outside of the lab, whether it was successful or not. The trail's sort of gone dead, but we're continuing to search. So you may have also heard this company, DNA Plant Technology, through their work for Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company. So in addition to its creation of the fish tomato, DNA Plant Technology is also famous for working on Y1 tobacco, which is a strain of tobacco with unusually high nicotine content. They were charged and pled guilty to illegally smuggling Y1 tobacco seeds out of the United States. Some of this is cataloged in this movie, The Insider. And as we're doing this research, truth is so much stranger than fiction, which is a great thing as an artist. So we're digging through these legal and journalistic documents, and it just gets weirder and weirder. We're happy to share them, and if you find new ones, we'd love to know what you find out. So people are going to do unexpected things with technology. Where is the fish tomato now? We're still looking for it. At one point, it was intellectual property, so we assume the seeds or the germplasm are in storage somewhere in the United States, unless they've been smuggled out. We have a recipe called vegetarian bouillabaisse, which calls for the fish tomato. It's incomplete as a recipe until we can find that ingredient. So we're still looking for it, so we can finally make the vegetarian bouillabaisse like it's supposed to be made. So our question is, where do failed GMOs go to die? We're not sure, but we'd ask for your help to paint a more complete picture of scientific history. We've been adding a lot of our research to the appropriate Wikipedia pages, and we hope to see you there, and maybe we can contest some of these ideas. And in case you turn anything up in your remote bioforensics research, we'd love to have it.
So the fourth ingredient for tonight is the zebrafish, and this story actually starts with another organism. Some jellyfish have a magnificent property where they appear to glow green in certain lighting conditions. This is caused by a gene sequence that expresses GFP, which is also known as green fluorescent protein. The zebrafish is a model species within biology and is used with a lab to study a whole host of phenomenon. So by inserting GFP into the zebrafish's DNA, scientists have created a glowing fish. I think we can say with some conviction that people are going to do unexpected things with technology. Building on this innovative application of biotechnology, a company decided to make this innovative new commodity available to the public by selling glowfish TM as pets. They're now available in most pet shops in the US, except for in California. The Glowing Sushi Cooking Show was created to demonstrate just how easy it is to innovate with new technologies right in your own kitchen. How can government agencies and companies predict how a new genome will be used once it's let out of a lab? They can't really. So the glowfish was approved as a pet, but that doesn't stop us from innovating on innovation and cooking with it. So here is our not in California roll. Or perhaps I can tempt you with a kryptonite roll, which has a wasabi glowfish paste spread on top of a cut cucumber sushi roll. Or the Stop and Glow sashimi roll. Soon we might have another GE fish to make sushi with. The fast-growing Aqua Bounty salmon is currently going through the FDA approval process for release in the US. It's being approved as a drug as opposed to a creation of a new animal or organism. So if this fish were to be approved, what might the unintended consequences be? Perhaps some people will be raising them as pets in their backyard, but according to Aquabounty's website, the fish are sterile and cannot contaminate the wild, even if they escape. So we'll be safe.
So our last ingredient is smog, which is not something you usually think about eating, but we've been really interested in this idea of using food as biosensors, and we wondered in what ways cooks might help you taste something ephemeral like smog. So there's all these digital biosensors around the world measuring air quality, but what is the feedback mechanism and who really gets to see that? We wanted a more direct way to interact with smog, and when you whip eggs into a foam, they become up to 90% air. So in smog tasting, you can map air quality by making foams in different parts of the city. So here's a few places we made foams. And so the foam could be tested for heavy metals or VOCs. You could compare them visually under microscopes to see what they've captured, or bake and serve them as Trojan horse sweets. One shouldn't worry too much about getting sick from these. We breathe the air every day, so they probably should be fine. And when you offer someone a meringue made on location from different parts of the city, you find out pretty quickly what their perceptions of the air quality is. You don't need all this fancy digital equipment. As we like to say, the tragedy of the commons never tasted so good.
So tonight we've shown you 5 ingredients that you might not necessarily want to eat yourself, but 2 years of critical research into the recent history of agriculture, science, and cuisine have led us down some strange alleys.
But we think that putting food, flavor, and cuisine front and center offers a new lens for asking questions that haven't been asked. We hope you join us on Wikipedia and in person to hash out some of the more fringe ingredients from our recent history. But now we're ready to move on from primarily critique to a generative process where we use the tools of cuisine to imagine and prototype our desires for the future of food. So we should have much more to report back to you here in the Science Gallery in less than 3 months. Thank you.
Thank you.